I got the notification while I was still in a forward operating base in Afghanistan. Warning: account balance below $500. I stared at my phone screen, the dust of Helmand province still coating my uniform. Just yesterday, there had been $43,782 in our joint savings account. My wife of 7 years, Jessica, had emptied nearly everything we owned while I was 7,000 miles away. Unable to do anything about it. My name is Marcus Sullivan, Staff Sergeant with the 10th Mountain Division, and this is the story of how my marriage ended halfway through my third deployment, and how preparation saved me from disaster. I met Jessica in 2011 at a bar near Fort Drum in upstate New York. I was fresh off my first tour in Afghanistan, still adjusting to being back in the world. She was finishing her nursing degree at a local college, vibrant and full of stories that had nothing to do with combat or military protocol. We clicked immediately, her lightness balancing my intensity, her spontaneity loosening the rigid discipline that had become my default setting. "You look like you could use some civilian conversation," she'd said, sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. 5 hours later, the bartender was giving us pointed looks as he wiped down the counter, and I had laughed more than I had in the previous year that we married 13 months later. Jessica understood what she was signing up for, or at least she thought she did. The long separations, the missed holidays, the constant moving from base to base. "I love you enough to handle it," she'd assured me, squeezing my hand as we stood at the altar. For the first few years, she did. She built a life around my absences, making friends with other military spouses, continuing her nursing career wherever we moved, creating a home that felt like a sanctuary when I returned from training or deployment. We were happy. At least, I thought we were. My second deployment in 2015 was harder on her. The daily video calls from my first tour dwindled to weekly phone calls with spotty connections. Combat operations intensified, and I couldn't always tell her what was happening or when I'd be able to reach out next. She started mentioning feeling isolated, despite being surrounded by other military families who understood the lifestyle. "I'm proud of what you do," she would say during our calls. "I just miss you." Her voice held something I couldn't quite identify, a weariness that lingered after we'd hung up. When I came home, things felt different. Subtle changes in our routines, in the way Jessica responded to my touch, in how she talked about the future. Nothing I could point to definitively, just a feeling in my gut that something had shifted. We found our rhythm again eventually, but it took longer than before. Then came the notice for my third deployment. Jessica's reaction wasn't what I expected. "Again?" she said, her voice flat. Not angry, not sad, just empty. "We just got settled here. It's my job," I replied, the same answer I'd given dozens of times before. But this time, it didn't seem to be enough. In the weeks before I shipped out, Jessica seemed to rally. She organized a farewell party with friends, helped me pack, made plans for projects she'd complete while I was gone. She even talked about possibly going back to school for her nurse practitioner license. I took it as a good sign. She was planning a future, keeping busy, staying positive. The night before my departure, we lay in bed facing each other, her fingers tracing the lines of my face as if memorizing them. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "Always am," I said, kissing her palm. "I've got too much to come home to." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I love you, Marcus. No matter what happens. Remember that." Looking back, I should have recognized those words for what they were, not reassurance but absolution for what she was already planning. The first 2 months of deployment went as expected. Jessica's messages were regular, if somewhat brief. She talked about her shifts at the hospital, dinner with friends from her unit, plans to repaint the kitchen. Normal stuff, nothing that raised any flags. Then the messages began to change. They became less frequent, shorter. She stopped asking about my day, my team, when I might get leave. When I asked about her plans for the weekend, her answers grew vague. Nothing special or just the usual. When I mentioned coming home for R&R in 3 months, she responded with, "We'll see how things go." Military life teaches you to trust your instincts. In combat zones, subtle changes in the environment. A road suddenly empty of children, an unusual silence in a normally bustling market, can signal danger. Those same instincts were now screaming at me that something was wrong at home, that I'd seen this happen to other guys in my unit over the years. The Dear John emails, the surprise divorce papers, the stripped apartments discovered on return from deployment. The military puts unique strains on marriages, and not all of them survive. But Jessica and I had always communicated openly about the challenges, or so I thought. Then came a 3-week period where I was deep in operations with minimal access to communications. When I finally got back to base and powered up my phone, there were only 2 brief messages from Jessica, both saying simply that she was fine and hoped I was safe. Nothing about her life, her day, her thoughts. Nothing personal at all. I called as soon as I could get a line out, but she didn't answer. I tried again the next day and the next. Finally, I got through. "Hey," she answered, her voice cautious, distant. "Everything okay?" I asked, the satellite delay making the conversation even more awkward. "I've been trying to reach you. I've been busy," she said. "Work's been crazy." "Jess, what's going on?" I asked directly. "Something feels off." The silence stretched so long I thought we'd lost connection. "I need some space, Marcus," she finally said. "This deployment, being alone again, it's making me realize some things." "What things?" I asked, though I already knew the answer in my gut. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she said. "The military life, never knowing if you're coming home, always being the one left behind." We talked for another 20 minutes around and around the same points. She needed time. She wasn't sure what she wanted. She loved me but didn't know if love was enough anymore. When we hung up, nothing was resolved, but a cold knot had formed in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the conversation felt rehearsed, as if she'd been practicing what to say. And there was something she wasn't telling me. I was certain of it. After years in military intelligence, I developed a sixth sense for when someone was hiding information. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I logged into our joint bank account, not just to check the balance as I usually did, but to review recent activity. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Over the past month, there had been multiple large withdrawals and transfers. 2,000 here, 5,000 there, moving money from our savings to an account I didn't recognize. And Jessica's spending patterns had changed dramatically. There were charges for expensive restaurants I'd never heard of, boutique clothing stores, even a weekend at a luxury hotel less than 100 miles from our home that I sat staring at the screen, the evidence of betrayal laid out in neat electronic rows. This wasn't just a spouse struggling with deployment. This was methodical preparation for a different life. One that clearly didn't include me. That I should have been angry, and part of me was, but my dominant emotion was a cold, tactical clarity. Years of military training had taught me how to function when emotions threatened to overwhelm. Now, I found myself approaching my disintegrating marriage like an operation requiring strategic planning. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd always maintained a separate emergency fund. Not out of distrust, but because my first platoon sergeant had drilled it into me as a young soldier. "Military life is unpredictable," he'd said. "Always have a backup plan that's yours alone." Over the years, I deposited a portion of my combat pay and bonuses into an account in my name only. It wasn't about keeping secrets, it was about preparedness. A lesson the Army had taught me well. That account now held just over $31,000. Funds Jessica either didn't know about or had forgotten existed. Enough to keep me on my feet if everything else collapsed. I didn't confront Jessica about the account activity. Not yet. Instead, I began my own preparations. I contacted my longtime friend and fellow veteran, Mike, back in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. "I need a favor," I said after explaining the situation. "Can you check on something for me?" Mike had been my battle buddy during my first deployment. Now a civilian working in construction management, he was the one person I trusted implicitly. "Whatever you need, brother," he replied without hesitation. I asked him to drive past our house on different days, different times. Just observations, who was coming and going, whether Jessica's car was there overnight, any patterns he could discern. I wasn't proud of the request, but I needed information before deciding my next move. A week later, Mike called with his report. "There's definitely someone else in the picture," he said. his voice grim. Black Audi, same guy 3 times this week. Stays overnight. They leave together in the morning. I felt a strange sense of calm as the last pieces fell into place. Not just financial betrayal, but emotional and physical as well. The complete package. Thanks, Mike, I said. I owe you. You don't owe me shit, he replied fiercely. What's the plan now? Now, I said, I protect what's mine. That afternoon, I made 3 calls. First to my command, requesting emergency leave. Not yet, but letting them know personal issues might require my presence stateside in the near future. Second, to a lawyer back home who specialized in military divorces. And third, to my bank, placing a freeze on the joint account that would prevent further withdrawals without dual authorization. The last call was the riskiest. It would alert Jessica that I knew something was wrong, possibly accelerating her plans. But I couldn't stand by while she drained the resources we'd built together over 7 years of marriage. I didn't have to wait long for her response. Less than 4 hours later, my phone pinged with a text. Why is our account frozen? I tried to pay bills and the card was declined. I waited an hour before responding. Which bills require $5,000 withdrawals? Her next message came quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I typed back. We can discuss when I'm home on leave. Until then, I've arranged for the mortgage and utilities to be paid automatically. Radio silence followed for 3 days. When she finally contacted me again, it was with a complete change in tone. Marcus, I know things look bad, but please let me explain. It's not what you think. Classic damage control. I'd seen this pattern before, not just in failing marriages, but in operations when someone's cover was blown. First denial, then an attempt to reframe the narrative. I'd like to hear your explanation, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. But first, I need to know how much is left in our accounts. The truth, when it finally came, was worse than I'd anticipated. Nothing, she admitted. It's all gone. I needed it for... Things came up. Things like the Audi your boyfriend drives. I asked. Another long pause. Then, how did you... Doesn't matter. I cut her off. What matters is what happens next. Over the next few days, the whole story emerged in pieces. His name was Ryan, a pharmaceutical rep she'd met at the hospital 6 months earlier. They'd been seeing each other for 4 months. He was divorced, had expensive tastes, and had convinced Jessica they deserved a fresh start together, funded largely by my money. He said it was half mine anyway, she justified, that I'd earned it by being a military spouse all these years. The withdrawals had funded the down payment on a condo, a trip to Cancun, and the leased Audi that Mike had spotted in our driveway. All told, she'd taken just over $41,000, nearly our entire savings. I was going to tell you, she insisted. I just wanted to wait until you were home. With everything already gone, I said, and decisions already made. I didn't think you'd fight for us anyway, she replied, her voice suddenly bitter. The army always comes first with you. It always has. That accusation stung precisely because it contained a grain of truth. The military had been my priority, my identity, my purpose. But I had always believed Jessica understood and supported that part of me. Apparently, I'd been wrong. We'll settle this legally when I return, I told her, my voice even. Until then, I expect you to move out of the house. It's in my name through the VA loan. Ryan and I already have the condo, she said quietly. I just need to get the rest of my things. Mike will be there when you do, I informed her, to make sure only your things leave the premises. When I hung up, I felt hollow. 7 years of marriage, ending in calculated betrayal rather than a mutual decision to part ways. No chance to fix what was broken. No opportunity to seek counseling or rediscover what had brought us together. Just a unilateral decision, executed while I was deployed in a combat zone, unable to defend myself or my assets. The timing wasn't coincidental. Jessica had waited until I was deep into deployment, established in a routine of minimal communication, before implementing her exit strategy. It was cold, tactical, and it would have been devastating if I hadn't had my backup plan. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings, documenting the unauthorized withdrawals and gathering evidence of infidelity. In most states, including ours, adultery still matters in military divorces, particularly when it involves financial misconduct. The lawyer seemed confident we had a strong case for recovering at least some of the funds, though he warned it could be a lengthy process. Meanwhile, I focused on my mission, compartmentalizing the personal chaos as best I could. My commanding officer, Major Reynolds, had seen this scenario enough times to understand its impact. "Take the time you need," he told me after I briefed him on the situation. "Your head needs to be clear out here." "My head is fine, sir," I assured him. "The job helps, actually." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "The offer stands. And Sullivan? She didn't deserve you." Word traveled fast in my unit. No one asked direct questions, but guys found ways to show support. Someone covered my guard duty without being asked. Extra cookies from care packages appeared on my bunk. A sergeant from another platoon who'd gone through a similar situation during his last deployment shared his lawyer's contact information, adding gruffly, "He's a bulldog." Made sure my ex didn't get a penny more than she deserved. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected email from Jessica. "I made a terrible mistake. Ryan isn't who I thought he was. He's gone, took most of the money with him. I'm so sorry, Marcus. Can we please talk about this when you get home? I want to try again." Attached was a police report. She'd filed charges against Ryan for theft and fraud. Apparently, her new beginning had ended almost before it began. The man who'd helped her dismantle our marriage had continued the pattern, taking advantage of her naive trust and disappearing with the majority of the funds she'd withdrawn from our accounts. I read the email 3 times, searching for the appropriate emotional response. Anger? Satisfaction? Pity? In the end, all I felt was a profound weariness. The damage was done. The trust was broken. No amount of regret could rebuild what had been so thoroughly destroyed. "I'll be home on leave in 6 weeks, I replied. "We can talk then, but I'm proceeding with the divorce. I'm sorry things didn't work out with Ryan, but that doesn't change what happened between us." Her response was immediate and desperate. Promises to make amends, to return to counseling, to be the wife she should have been all along. Reading between the lines, it was clear. With Ryan gone and the money mostly spent, she needed a safety net. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. When I finally returned to the States on leave 2 months later, the house was exactly as I'd left it, thanks to Mike's oversight. Jessica had removed her personal belongings as agreed, leaving behind the furniture and household items we'd accumulated together. It felt strange being there, like visiting a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. I met with my lawyer, reviewed the divorce proceedings, and signed the necessary paperwork. Jessica had attempted to contest the filing, but her position was weak given the documented financial misconduct and infidelity. The judge had already issued temporary orders preventing her from making any claims against my separate property or future income. The divorce should be finalized within 3 months, the lawyer explained. Given the circumstances, she's unlikely to receive any significant support. "I don't want to leave her destitute," I said, surprising myself with the admission. "We were together 7 years. That counts for something, even after all this." The lawyer nodded. "There's room for negotiation on a settlement, but I'd advise keeping it modest and one-time. Clean break." I agreed, authorizing him to offer a settlement of $10,000, roughly a quarter of what she'd taken, in exchange for an uncontested divorce and waiver of any future claims. It was more generous than many would have advised, but it felt like the right balance between self-protection and recognition of our shared history. 2 days later, I was sitting on my back deck with Mike, drinking beers and watching the sunset, when my doorbell rang. Jessica stood on the porch, looking thinner than I remembered, dark circles under her eyes. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Please." Mike stood immediately, his posture tense. "I'll give you guys some space." "No need," I told him. "Jessica and I can talk out here." I gestured to the front porch swing, maintaining a physical boundary by not inviting her inside. She sat rigidly, hands clasped in her lap. Up close, The changes were more evident. The strain in her face, the nervous energy in her movements. She'd always been vibrant, full of easy laughter and spontaneous affection. The woman before me now seemed hollowed out, diminished. I received the settlement offer, she began. It's more than I expected. It seemed fair, I replied. Fair would be you taking everything, she said softly. After what I did. I didn't respond. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several moments. I just need you to know it wasn't about you, she finally continued. Ryan, he made me feel alive when I'd been feeling invisible for so long. During your last deployment, I started believing I'd never be more than the wife waiting at home. He convinced me I deserved more. And did you? I asked. Get more? She laughed bitterly. I got played by a professional con artist. He's done this before. Targets women connected to deployed soldiers, encourages them to secure assets, then disappears with whatever he can get. The police say there are at least 3 other victims they know of. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said, and meant it. But it doesn't change what you did. I know. She looked down at her hands. I'm not asking for reconciliation anymore. I wanted you to know it wasn't because I stopped loving you. I got lost, made terrible choices. I nodded, unsure what response she was looking for. Forgiveness? Understanding? Neither seemed possible right now. I'll accept the settlement, she continued. And I'll sign whatever you need to make this process easier. Thank you, I said simply. She stood to leave, pausing at the steps. You were always better at planning than me, she said with a sad smile. Your backup fund, that was smart. It wasn't about distrusting you, I told her. It was about being prepared for any scenario. The military teaches you that. I know, she said. I just wish. She shook her head, leaving the thought unfinished. Take care of yourself, Marcus. I watched her walk to her car, not the new Audi, but her old Honda Civic, and drive away. There was no sense of triumph, no vindication in seeing her reduced circumstances. Only a dull ache for what might have been, and gratitude for the foresight that had protected me from complete financial devastation. Mike rejoined me on the deck, handing me a fresh beer. You okay? Yeah, I said after a moment. I think I am. In the following months, as I completed my deployment and the divorce was finalized, I often thought about preparation versus paranoia. Had some part of me always anticipated this outcome? Had I maintained that separate account because subconsciously I didn't fully trust Jessica? Or was it simply the military mindset, always have a contingency plan, always be ready for the unexpected, that had saved me? When I finally returned home for good, I used some of my emergency fund to make improvements to the house. A fresh start in a familiar space. I replaced the living room furniture, repainted walls, created a home gym in the spare bedroom. Physical changes to mirror the internal ones. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a package at the house. Inside was a check for $8,000 and a brief note from Jessica. This is what I've managed to save so far. I know it's nowhere near what I took, but it's a start. I'll keep sending what I can. Not because I have to, but because it's right. I'm sorry, Marcus. For everything. I deposited the check into my emergency fund, now a rebuilding fund, and tucked the note away. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that even the people closest to us can become strangers when circumstances and choices pull them in unexpected directions. A year after returning from deployment, I faced a decision. Re-enlist for another term or transition to civilian life. After 15 years of service, including 3 combat deployments, I had to evaluate what I wanted for my future. The military had given me purpose, structure, brotherhood, but it had also cost me a marriage and countless missed moments with family and friends. I chose to transition out, accepting a contractor position that would utilize my intelligence background while offering stability and location permanence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was finally able to offer the lifestyle Jessica had wanted only after she was gone. My emergency fund, the backup plan that had saved me during the darkest period of my life, became the foundation for my civilian future. I added to it regularly, not out of fear that history would repeat itself, but because preparation had become second nature. The fund represented not just financial security, but a reminder that we control at least some elements of our fate through foresight and discipline. Today, 3 years after that shocking account notification in Afghanistan, my life bears little resemblance to the one I shared with Jessica. I'm settled in Columbus, close to my family, working a job that challenges me without requiring months away from home. I date occasionally, though I'm cautious about serious involvement. Trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly. Jessica and I haven't spoken since the day on my porch, though she's continued to send periodic payments, smaller amounts now, but consistent. I considered telling her to stop, that the debt was satisfied, but something holds me back. Perhaps it's her need for atonement or my need for ongoing acknowledgement of what was taken. Either way, the arrangement continues, a tenuous connection to a chapter of my life that's otherwise firmly closed. Sometimes I wonder how things might have unfolded without my backup plan. Would I have returned from deployment to an empty house and empty accounts, forced to rebuild from absolute zero? Would the shock and financial strain have affected my performance in a combat zone, potentially endangering myself or my teammates? The possibilities are sobering. Military service teaches many lessons that extend far beyond the battlefield. Preparation, resilience, adapting to changing conditions, the importance of solid intelligence before making critical decisions. All these served me well when my personal life imploded thousands of miles from home, but perhaps the most important lesson came after, that survival isn't the same as victory, and that protecting yourself from catastrophe is just the first step in building something worthwhile from the aftermath. My backup plan gave me financial security when I most needed it, but rebuilding a life worth living required something more, the courage to trust my own judgment again, to envision a future different from my past, and to remain open to possibilities despite profound disappointment. Last month, I received a letter from a young soldier in my former unit who'd heard about my experience through the military grapevine. He was deploying for the first time, newly married and nervous about leaving his wife behind. "Any advice?" he asked. "How do I protect my marriage during deployment?" I thought carefully before responding, wanting to offer wisdom without projecting my own experience onto his situation. "Communication is critical," I wrote. "But so is independence, both yours and hers. A healthy marriage during deployment requires trust, but trust doesn't mean blind faith. It means creating systems that work for both of you, having honest conversations about finances and expectations, and yes, having individual safety nets for unexpected circumstances." I added a few more practical suggestions: joint and separate financial planning, regular communication schedules, support groups for military spouses. Before concluding, hope for the best in your marriage, work for it constantly, but also prepare for challenges. That's not cynicism, it's reality in military life. The strongest relationships are those where both people feel secure as individuals within the partnership. As I sealed the letter, I reflected on how my perspective had evolved. The backup plan that once seemed like a pragmatic financial precaution had revealed itself to be something more profound, a foundation of self-reliance that helped me weather betrayal without being destroyed by it. Jessica's actions had emptied our bank accounts, but my preparation ensured she couldn't empty my future as well. In military terms, I had established a secure position before the attack came, not because I anticipated betrayal from my spouse specifically, but because life has taught me that vulnerability comes in many forms and strength lies in ready resilience. The notification that changed everything, warning, account balance below $500, now exists as a distant memory rather than an active wound. It marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a pivotal moment where preparation met opportunity disguised as catastrophe. I don't know what the future holds. Perhaps another relationship, perhaps continued solitude. Either way, I move forward with the knowledge that while we can't control others' actions, we can always control our response, not just in the moment of crisis, but in the quiet, unremarkable moments before, when decisions about preparation shape our capacity to endure whatever comes next. My backup plan wasn't just about money. It was about maintaining the freedom to choose my path forward even when others made choices that could have derailed me completely. In that sense, it wasn't merely financial preparation, it was emotional insurance against the paralyzing impact of unexpected betrayal, and that may be the most valuable lesson of all. True security isn't found in relationships or bank balances, but in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've prepared yourself financially, emotionally, practically to face whatever storms may come. Not in fear, but in readiness. Not in paranoia, but in peace.